Good morning, everyone. It's 8:02. Let's begin the Executive Committee of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. My name is Dan McKiernan. I'm the chair. On my left is Doug Haymans, the vice chair. First, approval of the agenda. Is there any recommended changes to the agenda from the XCOM? I do have a few that I'd like to introduce. We're going to move up the future meetings discussion between number 6 and 7. And then we're going to go into executive session after the legislative committee report to talk about CARES update and ongoing litigation. And that will be that will end the meeting. Approval of the meeting summary from August. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as presented? Joe Grist, second. Ben Dyer, thank you. Any objections? Seeing none, approved. Public comment. Is there anyone in the room or online who would like to make a public comment on anything that is specifically not on this morning's agenda? Seeing none. All right, we're going to go to the report of the Administrative Oversight Committee. I guess as vice chair, I was the head of that committee. So, but today we're going to get a presentation or a report on the audit from Laura Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I emailed on Monday, which I'm sorry it was so late, but I didn't get it until the day before, last Friday. So I emailed the audit to you all. And my presentation is, once again, we had a clean audit. There were no negative findings, and our equity increased by $200,000. So we remain in a very solid financial position. The change in the audit, I think I've had one question about it, of course, was the 2024 column included still some CARES activity, which is why the decrease was a little bit more striking than normal. But the 2025 is what we normally have as an annual budget. Are there any questions?
Seeing none, do we need a vote to accept the audit? All right, can I get a motion to accept the audit? Jason McNamee, seconded by John Clark. Any discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to accepting the audit? Seeing none, passes by unanimous consent. Next is an issue that I know that over my next 2 years as chair is going to be one that I need to spend some special attention to for the good of the order, for the good of the commission, and that's declared interest in voting privileges work group. We're going to have Bob give a report on that. I know that there's been a facilitator that's been hired, and we're hopeful that we can come up with some good consensus solutions moving forward. So Bob, why don't we turn it over to you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, very briefly, as Dan said, the working group is formed. The membership of the working group is, off the top of my head, Nicola Meserve, David Borden, Mike Luisi, Joe Grist, Chris Bat-Savage, Ben Dyer, and Erica. So those are the 7 people that are on the committee or on the work group. The facilitator that we've hired is Pat Field from Consensus Building Institute. I think a lot of people in this room have worked with Pat on different projects, a lot of wind power activities and some other things. So he's good, and he knows fisheries business pretty well. So the group had one meeting a couple weeks ago, and it was really, during that meeting, it was just kind of a round robin discussion on a little bit of background on just getting an overall perception of where the individual members are, and what they want to get out of the discussions, and where they, what their view of the issues are. There's another meeting scheduled for November 7th. And that meeting, the group's I'll kind of give a presentation on the background of the issues, similar to what I've given to this executive committee in the past on, what just an overview of what is included in our guidance documents and how we've been operating, and highlight some of the issues that have come up over the last few years. And then I think that's going to set the stage to really jump in and start having meaningful discussions with that group. The group set up in our contract with the facilitators for, I think, 5 meetings. We also have some room in there for conversations sort of out in smaller groups, maybe regional. So you know, the group is underway, but relatively, you know, new and just getting started. So I think we'll have a lot more to report out at the winter meeting, and you know, the hope is we can get some recommendations and a document to present at the winter meeting. So that's the timeline we're on. You know, it's going to take a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion to come up with options. The group's going to try to work by consensus, but maybe or maybe not. Yeah, it's unsure if that's possible. But if there's not a consensus position from the group, we'll bring forward, you know, 2 different options and let the bigger group at the policy board, or it's going to come to the executive committee first and then roll over to the full policy board to make any final decisions on you know, procedural changes at the commission. So that's the background. Happy to answer any questions. And about, I know half the group is sitting at the table here. So if they have any other comments or thoughts, they can share them if you're okay with that, Mr. Chair.
Any comments from any other participants? All right, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Discussion on notifying actions on meeting agendas. And I think this came about from a previous meeting when some stakeholder groups were concerned about the outcome of the meeting, having an action item that wasn't in their mind sufficiently advertised.
Yeah, great, thanks, Dan. So, you know, the rules and regulations in the charter are very clear on notifications for what we call final actions, and it defines final actions as setting specifications, quotas, trip limits, possession limits, size limits, seasons, area closures, gear requirements, allocation, final approval of of FMP's amendments, addenda, emergency actions, conservation equivalency, and non-compliance recommendations. So those things are all very clearly stated that if any of those actions are going to happen, we have to notify the public 4 days in advance of one of these quarterly meetings, or if it's going to be a virtual meeting, it has to be 48 hours in advance for a virtual meeting for any of those actions to be notified. I think the issue is that sort of other actions that aren't final actions that are, as I just read, it's unclear what exactly needs to be noticed and how to do that. And I think a good example is, you know, a charge to a technical committee or a plan development team. Is that a quote unquote action that needs to be notified, or is that just something that sort of organically happens a lot at board meetings? And, you know, the board, you may not even anticipate prior to that board meeting that, you know, something needs some more analysis and needs to go back to a TC or a stock assessment committee or whatever it is. And, you know, we were criticized for not notifying that something like that could occur at a meeting. So I guess the question for the group is, do we need something added to either the charter or the rules and regulations that, you know, defines actions that, you know, that aren't final actions? They're just, you know, intermediate pieces of sort of progress toward a final action. But we don't really have guidelines to notice those and let, you know, that on how exactly that needs to be spelled out in an agenda and what the timeline is to notice that in an agenda. So it's a pretty general topic, but it's probably worth deciding, or at least having a discussion on how that should operate.
This should generate some good discussion. So Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Seems like what Lynn Fegley did yesterday with Menhaden would fit into that category, where she brought up something that she wanted to initiate. And it would seem to me that when we come to a meeting, during the course of the meeting, some information may be brought up and it might generate someone having an idea to do something in the future. And I don't think that there should be any need for any notification for that. So other than, you know, taking final actions, I think it's just a different category.
Thank you, Dennis. Erica?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can understand and appreciate the public's frustration and concerns, but I think the burden of trying to predict and notice every single potential direction to a technical committee or initiation of exploring a new addendum is challenging to, as I said, predict and forecast. And it would really hamstring the ASMFC from moving forward in a timely manner on items. I think a simple solution might be to have a statement on the agenda to notice the public that during the course of the management board meetings and committees that items may come up, that the board will direct development of new items, may consider intermediate action, and just putting the notice out there. If you're interested in this topic, be aware, pay attention, because things may occur over the course of the meeting.
So Erica, are you describing some kind of stock language that just resides at the bottom of any meeting, board or species board? Yeah, okay. Ben Dyer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Doug and Erica kind of hit exactly basically what I was going to say is, but also to maybe first get a lay of the land. Are they, I'm not aware of the concerns that were brought forward specifically. Is it the specifics to outside of anything of a final action? Because we do, I feel like, post those. Obviously, we have very specific how, when, where. But if there's things outside of that, you know, we do post potential actions. Those are sometimes posted. And so I don't know. I agree with Eric and Doug about that. And my exact point about the addendum that was brought up in the Menhaden board by Lynn, and the perception of what an action is, I think is maybe the interpretation is maybe difficult for sometimes the public to understand that this is not something that does happen organically in some of these discussions, and totally agree that would, if we were to come to that point, say yesterday, and we all had to come to a full stop and then wait until that's on an agenda, you know, 3 months later, or whenever that board meeting came back around, you know, there's also the concern from the public that, you know, fisheries management doesn't necessarily happen at lightning speed sometimes. And so to further extend this process, I think you're going to run up against even more concerns of us kind of sitting idle and taking longer to make some of these very difficult decisions that sometimes happen in these discussions. So I agree with Eric. I think that's a good idea, is to maybe have some type of language on there that notifies them that potentially these things can come up and happen via discussions, but that to know that any total final action on that addendum or on whatever decision we're going to be is going to be posted, and maybe there's, along with a notice that says, you know, these potentially can come up, and maybe to list some of the potential things, and then but final actions will always be noted in the agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So I have a question for you, Bob. Is the issue that was raised by the concerned parties that the ASMFC rule of procedures just didn't have that kind of language, that if it had, is that enough? Do we need, in other words, would it be enough to change the ASMFC operating procedures as opposed to adding it to every agenda?
I'm not sure. To be really blunt, I think the folks that were complaining were looking for something to complain about and push back because they didn't like the action, to be really blunt. But, you know, I think if something, I would almost suggest, I think Erica's idea is great, and, you know, put something just a catch-all at the bottom of the agenda, but I would also almost take that exact same language and move that into the ISFMP charter as well, just sort of noticing that, you know, the boards take intermediate action that lead up, and all those intermediate actions, charging a technical committee or whatever it is, but not final action. And if we initiate an addendum, you go through obviously the public comment process, and there's, you know, all these other pieces and opportunities for engagement of the public will happen. So I think we just need to concisely notice that, you know, the boards have the flexibility to initiate actions and charge subordinate groups with tasking during these meetings, and that may happen at any time. And so I think those, if the board is comfortable with adding it to agendas and the policy, I mean, and the ISFMP charter, I think we'd be in good shape. Yeah.
All right. I've got Bill Hyatt. Joe, are you trying to get in the queue?
Yeah, my comment was the same as Erica's. We need a routine business umbrella statement, and wherever the most appropriate place for that that I think is the way out.
All right, John Clark.
Thank you, Dan. I was chair of the meeting in question because when I discussed the agenda with James even, I certainly understood the complaint that was made about it because the person who made the complaint is much more used to doing council meetings, where because of the Administrative Procedures Act, something like what we did should have been put on the agenda as an action item. And having to work with an Administrative Procedures Act in my own state that is modeled after the federal one, I understood where that was coming from because, take, for example, yesterday for the Chesapeake action, it did say, consider tasking a PDT to develop something, and it was possible action was put right on there. I think there's no downside to the term possible action anytime there is the possibility of an action, especially when we're developing a plan. Tasking a TC, I don't think anybody would have complained about that. The complaint came up because it seemed like we were going from a further discussion of what the work group had come up with and that we had discussed at the spring meeting. And then at the summer meeting, we were already talking about going to an addendum, and it was not noticed on the agenda as an action item. And I mean, personally, I agree with the people who said that should have been put on there as a possible action. And I don't see there's any downside if you think a topic could develop into a task to a PDT to start an addendum saying this is a possible action item because, that, as I said, under the APA, you should be noticing that.
So to summarize, your advice is if the board chair already expects there to be that kind of a tasking, then it's good government to get it into the agenda. However, if it didn't make it onto the agenda and it was organic, the language that Erica described could cover us.
Right. I just think that something like that, going back and at the time, I thought like it wouldn't have hurt to put it on the agenda for the summer meeting to say that this could lead to the tasking of a PDT to develop an addendum. So, I just think that with certain species, we kind of know where things are going to be going on the agenda items, and just giving the public all possible warning that could happen. Because the person who was most upset about that was correct when he said if it was a council and they had to follow the federal APA, that would have had to have been noticed as a action item.
Thanks, John. Lynn, and then I'll go to Joe.
Yeah, thanks. And, fessing up that this was sort of a Maryland issue. The most important thing to me is that, one, everybody sitting around the commission understands exactly what the rules of engagement are. And I think that, and I love the idea of a blanket statement, but I think we would be wise anytime that there is new information being brought to the board, in the form of a work group report or we asked for this information, it is what this body is likely to do and we had even gone home and said, let's digest it, let's think about it. We should expect that an action could arise. But that said, if we're putting possible action, I also fear a little bit that, the most important thing we can do is engage the public. And I think we have a little bit of process fatigue with our constituents already where, fisheries management processes take a long time. If it's an amendment, it's several meetings, there's multiple public hearings on the same issue. And I think, I see our constituents sometimes get themselves a little lost in the process. So I guess I'm saying that because I want to make sure we're not sort of over advertising and having people all, sort of always on the balls of their feet. But I think we need to, the most important thing is really to make sure we're abiding, we're not opening ourselves up for legal action, that we're following the correct process, and that everybody understands what that process is and the public is noticed. I mean, that's sort of that's the goal.
Sure, thank you. Joe?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I had a chance to think through this some. Lynn and I spoke, and I agree. Sorry, John, I certainly didn't come down here thinking I need to be contrary, but I disagree. I think Lynn's right. I think so. Something like always saying possible action on every agenda means people still don't know where we go. Like, when we're talking about starting an addendum, we're talking about starting a public process. I think we're in a very good place to say we are going to start a public process. Here you go, everybody. I think that next step, this is me just trying to think this through, that next step of what does the draft addendum look like? What actually goes out to the public? I don't think we've ever been in a place where that hasn't been advertised as a possible action to say we're going to move that addendum forward. And I think that's a great important place for public input. You're going to have the Mike Waynes and the Greg DiDomenico say, this is too confusing. Don't even bring this out. That's technical. Leave that with the TC. That doesn't need to be brought out to the public. I think it's that next level. I think the idea that we can't, as Ben said, kind of move forward when responding to information that we have to task a TC or to start a public process is a bit concerning to me. I've been spending a lot of time with lawyers, so one of the things that Ben mentioned that I think is kind of looked at favorably is giving you that sort of, these are the range of things that may happen. I think, and going back kind of to Erica's statement too, is like, what do you put out there that is explaining these are the range of things that this commission may jump into, and here is where the public would come in before we ever took action. And I agree with Lynn, defining that we're all on the same page on where that happens is great. But I do worry a little bit about every agenda item has possible action. No one knows when to come in anymore.
John?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to respond quickly. I just think if you look again at the agenda for the Menhaden meeting yesterday, I think it's a good example of how simple this can be. I mean, for the assessment, it said it was an action item. We had to accept either accept or reject the assessment. So that's an action. Setting the specs says final action. That was what it was. It was a final action to set the specs. And then for the other things we had, like for the commercial quota reallocation, it says possible action. I don't think that's confusing to the public. It's letting them know we might take an action there. And that way if we just said consider commercial quota reallocation and it didn't say possible action, they'd think that, oh, we're just going to be discussing it at the meeting. This lets them know that we might actually reallocate right then and there, anything that's possible under the plan. So again, I don't think it's a big deal, but I didn't think it was very difficult to have those degrees of explanation as to whether it be an action item or not on the agenda.
Okay, thanks. Malcolm, I see your hand up. What I'm struggling with is to try to have an XCOM meeting and not like a larger policy board meeting. But having said that, I don't think this is going to come up at the policy board. So I will recognize you.
I do appreciate it, and thank y'all for allowing this. I was a member of the state board of a conservation organization that y'all probably well know. And at one of our meetings, when we had the whole state board together, someone came in and explained the council process and the commission process and the times for input, the time certainty of how we do things. And on the new website, it may be there, but I don't know if we had like a frequently asked question that explained how we do things, where it comes in, the time for public input, when the action's done. And we are on a very much of a time certain deadline when we do an addendum or an amendment. that I think it's 14 or 16 months. I mean, it's very clear. And just to spell that out clearly so that if there's any of these concerns, they can look at the website and say, all right, they may be initiating that, but we have this spot, and this spot to make our desires known or our thoughts put in before any action is taken. And it's just, and anyway, it's just something on the website that if it's sitting there and someone can push a button and go, oh, that's how they do business, I think it could allay a lot of this suspicion that we're doing things behind closed doors. My 2 cents worth.
Thanks. That's a great comment. I obviously made the right decision there. Erica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our Administrative Procedures Act for Florida is something that is more in line with what Joe described. And I think it works really well because we present things to our commission. It might be on the agenda. They may hear something in public comment that could not have been noticed on the agenda. And then they tell us as staff, I'm really interested in knowing more about that. I want you to start work on this. That's within bounds. Now, before I bring a proposal or recommendation for a proposal to my commission, I have to notice that at that point. And I think that's more what Joe is saying. Like, let's not stop the generation of new ideas and narrow us down to set us up for limited flexibility and having the public say, you can't do that because you didn't notice it on an agenda. I'd prefer to leave it broader. And then when that actual item comes before the commission or management board to make decisions on where the range of options we'd like to see be, have that be noticed. And that would be my preference.
Okay, thanks. Joe Grist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in the same agreement, though I completely respect what John was having to say about possible action versus action. Our process is basically the same in our state as well. Joe and all knows. You can do anything from our own state commission. They can direct staff to do something through the commissioner. They can task it to an advisory committee, or they can ask us to bring a actionable item back up at our next meeting. That would go through a public process, a public notification process. So I think if we could at least add in what we were talking about earlier, just a standard language item on our agendas that's covering that these potential action, this type of potential is there. They could initiate an addendum. They could ask for a working paper, something. We just add that as standard boilerplate language. We'll get to the heart, I think, where the issue is here. It seems like we are operating within a lot of way our states operate. It's just, it does catch people off guard because they're not familiar with the process. And I respect that.
Thank you, Joe. So Bob, it seems like we've got some really good recommendations here. Would you like to come back after you talk to staff, say at the February meeting, with a proposal to this group? And then we'll take it to the policy board to see if we can introduce it into some of the official documents.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yep.
All right, everybody good? Brilliant. All right. Report of the Legislative Committee, Alexander.
Good deal. Thank you, Dan. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the shutdown, some discussion on the Fisheries Data Modernization Act and the Cohogs Act. Things have been fairly slow up on the Hill recently. We are in day 29 of the shutdown. The House has been out of session for 40 days. The House and Senate have not passed a budget for FY26. There are a few options for how they can move forward. They can pass a short-term continuing resolution, allowing them to resume negotiations on regular appropriations bills, a year-long CR, passage of individual appropriations bills, and passage of a larger omnibus appropriations bill, or some combination of those options. Having passed multiple stacked one-year-long appropriations bills in a row, they've been working off of the funding levels and priorities set by Congress in FY24. Some priorities have become outdated. Passing regular appropriations bills would be ideal for aligning funding to the relevant priorities and with the change in the administration. As a reminder, the draft Senate Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill is very strong for ASMFC's priorities. The House bill is a little more focused on golf issues. There are a couple of different pain points for Congress coming up that might prompt them to pass a CR or regular appropriations bills. I'll just quickly list through those. They include the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, running out of money on November 1st. This is a food assistance program that 40 million people rely on. Federal funding for some early childhood education programs, which 800,000 children under the age of 6 benefit from, will also run out of money on November 1st. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for women, infants, and children that helps about 7 million low-income mothers and babies will also run out of money on November 1st. The Essential Air Service, which subsidizes airline travel to small, often rural communities, is likely to run out of funding on November 1st. And military members and civilian employees from government agencies will be missing their first full paycheck coming up on November 1st. So these are some pain points that might prompt Congress to act and maybe pass a CR of some kind. It's possible that they will, since the shutdown began, 5 Senate Democrats have already voted for either the House passed CR or the GOP bill to pay non-furloughed federal workers. If all 5 support another rifle shot or CR approach, they aren't far from that 60 vote threshold to actually get something passed. So they would need 2 more Dem senators to sign on and get something through. That being said, it's unclear when the shutdown will end. We're going to begin to see some more drastic impacts from the shutdown coming up, but it's very hard to predict when this will end. We have asked for a 2-year extension to the New Jersey CARES Act pause. I know that Bob is going to talk a bit more about this once you guys go into closed session. The current deadline for that year-long extension is this coming December 4th. We're planning on resending that request for another 2-year extension as soon as the government opens. Our letter for that request has received an out-of-office email, so nobody has taken a look at that yet. Moving on to the Fisheries Data Modernization Act. This is the bill that came up last Congress from Representative Graves of Louisiana, talking about reforming the Marine Recreational Information Program. This has been reintroduced in the House by Representative Rutherford of Florida, who represents an Atlantic coastal district. We've met with his staff in the past, who have been really responsive and helpful. We intend to meet with them again about some lingering concerns about the bill. So, moving on to the Quahogs Act. This is a bill that was introduced in the Senate by Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island and Scott of South Carolina. This would create a task force to investigate wild bivalve declines across the East Coast. It would require our participation in the task force. Bob and I met with Hill staff about this. We were a little confused. We don't manage any bivalves. Staff said that they are open to amending the language to remove us, but their intention would be for us to serve as a coordination role between the East Coast states. ASMFC staff and the legislative committee were generally comfortable about the commitment level participation in this task force would require. Happy to take any questions.
John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alexander. I just wanted to follow up. I found the email. I think I told you that one of our senators asked our secretary for thoughts on that. And so the explanation from NOAA was to assemble the research task force, right? But does it specify, other than you're saying ASMFC was on it, would it be universities, state agencies, or is there anything spelled out in that?
Yeah, so it is detailed in the bill. Off the top of my head, I can remember participation from councils, academic institutions. I know that there was some discussion of commercial harvesters and other research entities.
But it's all research funds, right? It's not for supporting any type of planting or anything like that.
I'll have to check back. I do think that there was a grant program for some pilot programs eventually.
Anyone else? Bill Hyatt.
Yeah, just a reminder that sometime, hopefully not too far in the future, there'll be an opportunity to move forward on reauthorization of the sport fish restoration. And I assume, Alex, that there'll be, at that point in time, there'll be a reach out to get folks to meet with their legislators and senators.
There will be, and I was recently informed that a staffer from Representative Dingell's office of Michigan, who introduced the reauthorization bill, is moving over to work for the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission, so to do some legislative work for them. So we will have a good ally in the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission to help promote sport fish reauthorization.
Thank you, Alexander. Great report. All right, next on the agenda, well, we have a few things. We have CARES update, future annual meetings, other business. So what I intend to do is do an executive session at the tail end of this meeting to talk about the parts of the CARES update as well as litigation. So I'd like to move right now to future annual meetings, get an update from Laura, and then I'll go to other business in case there's anyone in the room who wants to speak to the executive committee. So Laura?
Thank you, Dan. So next year we will be in Rhode Island and we're going to be in Newport the first week of November, although we may try to push it to the second week because the first week has election day. Do you have anything you want to say, Jason?
Nope, just looking forward to having everybody in Newport. It's a super fun place. I'm sure many of you have maybe been there before, so lots to see and do, and I think we'll set up some fun stuff for everybody, so looking forward to it.
Thank you. It will be at the Hotel Viking.
Thank you, Dan. Jay, when do you think in October?
It's
Oh,
November.
November. Okay. When in November do you think?
November, either the first week or the second week. The first week has an election day, so I'm checking to see if they have the second week available.
Thank you.
Back to you, Laura.
Thank you. It will be, as I said, at the Hotel Viking, which is undergoing a big renovation and having its 100th birthday next year. So that should be fun. In 2027, we'll be in South Carolina. I've been talking with my friends in South Carolina, and Ben, do you want to say anything? Have we come up with?
No, right now, still exploring all possibilities, and excited for the opportunity and looking forward to it. Hopefully we can find something that works and get everybody down to South Carolina.
One of the things that Malcolm did mention was that Charleston is continuing to be expensive year round now. So we're hopeful that we're going to find somebody that will be kind to us and give us a good enough rate that we can afford it. And then 2028, we're going to be back in Massachusetts. So Dan and I haven't really talked about it yet. Anything you want to say, Dan?
Looking forward to it. Well, the last time we held it was in Boston, and I assume the commission and you would like to do that again? Yeah.
2029 will be in Pennsylvania. Chris and I haven't talked yet. And then 2030 will be in Georgia. So I'm not going to put anyone else on the spot. That's my report.
All right. If there's no, oh, go ahead, Joe. Did you want to speak? Yep.
Just not that I think it should be mandatory, but I hope you at least think about low country boils for us when we come back down. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to go to other business, and then we're going to go back to an executive session, like I said, to talk about litigation and some CARES update. Under other business, is there anything among the executive committee meeting members who would like to bring anything up under other business, because then I'll go to the audience. All right. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to address this board at this time? Dustin?
Good morning, Dustin Delano from the New England Fishermen Stewardship Association. If there's one thing that I strive for above all in my quest to advocate for commercial fishermen at NEPSA, it's to encourage their participation in the regulatory process and make sure their voices are heard. Yesterday, more than 100 commercial fishermen traveled hundreds of miles, giving up a day's pay or several days' pay to attend the meeting here. They came to share their perspectives on the proposed cuts to the menhaden quota. However, when public comment began, time was restricted to 60 seconds, which is understandable. But after many stood up, the chair announced only 3 comments would be taken. In total, fewer than a half dozen fishermen were able to speak. I found that deeply discouraging. These fishermen showed up in good faith, believing their voices would matter. Limiting their ability to engage sends a troubling message that their input isn't truly valued. And I want to be clear, this is not a condemnation of any individual. I have great respect for the commissioners and the relationships that we've built. But if the goal is to foster trust and buy-in from the fishing industry, participation must be welcomed and not discouraged. If you want buy-in from industry on management decisions, you just cannot discourage participation. I stand ready and willing to work with commissioners to find constructive ways to make industry engagement more meaningful. But yesterday's events should serve as a reminder that genuine collaboration starts with listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin. Is there anyone else at this time that wants to come to the public microphone from the public? All right, seeing none, we are going to go into executive session, and by the commission's policies, folks who are not members of the commission, whether they be the administrative commissioners, legislative appointees, proxies, or governor's appointees, will need to leave the room. And this will be our last item, so we won't be reconvening. This group will just end the meeting when our business is done.